Understand the current situation in Hong Kong, we need to look to its past, and here's some highlights from Hong Kong's history. The first Opium War, fought between Britain and China, lasted between 1840 and 1842. It ended with the Treaty of Nanking, in which China ceded Hong Kong to the British. In the 1980s, negotiations took place between the Chinese and British governments over the future of Hong Kong. And in 1997, the British returned Hong Kong to China. And to take us further into Hong Kong's history, we're joined now by Nathan King. Nathan.
Yeah, it's good to see that snapshot, isn't it, Mike? Over the last couple of weeks, we have been reporting on the protests in Hong Kong, the here and the now, as you said, and the future. But how do we get to this point? How did Hong Kong get to be so different from the Chinese mainland? And what role did the British colonial power play in Hong Kong's development and destiny? Let's take a look.
In the 21st century, it's difficult to imagine a war being fought over the right to import highly addictive opium into China. But in the 1840s, that's exactly what happened. And with the British victory came the prize of Hong Kong. And with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking, the first of the so-called unequal treaties, China was forced to lower its tariffs. Hong Kong was absorbed into a growing British Empire. British Hong Kong, with the addition of Kowloon on the mainland and the new territories, became the premier trading post in Asia. So separate was Hong Kong from China that when Japan invaded northern China in 1937, sparking yet another Sino-Japanese war, Hong Kong remained neutral. Nevertheless, in 1941, the Japanese attacked and Hong Kong, like much of Asia, was occupied by Japan. It was after World War II that Hong Kong began to flourish. A source of high skill and cheap labour, its textile industry boomed. A modern Hong Kong was made, skyscrapers crowding for a view of the South China Sea. Its prosperity due in no small part to the fact that it was one of the only gateways for doing business in China. But it was still part of the United Kingdom, direct rule from London through a Governor-General appointed by the British government, and everything from the legal system to education imported from the UK. But the clock was always ticking. The UK was due to hand back the new territories, now effectively part of British Hong Kong, to China by 1997. Uncertainty about the future of Hong Kong led both London and Beijing to start talks at the end of the 1970s. But it was China's Deng Xiaoping and Britain's Margaret Thatcher who cemented Hong Kong's future in the 1980s. Negotiations got off to a rocky start. The UK suggested it continue to administer Hong Kong from London while returning sovereignty back to China. China countered that sovereignty was indivisible from authority over Hong Kong, and the idea went nowhere. China made it clear that nothing less than the return of all the territories ceded to the UK would suffice. But China did amend its constitution to allow for special administrative regions. This was the beginning of the so-called one country, two systems policy. One country, two systems essentially meant Hong Kong could keep its capitalist way of life while China remained socialist. Also preserved in the new arrangement, Hong Kong would be an indivisible part of China. Hong Kong's justice, education and social systems would also remain in place until 2047. And Hong Kong's defence and foreign policy would transfer from London to Beijing. June 30th, 1997. The peaceful handover of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom back to China, and the departure of the last Governor-General and the end of the British Empire. One major sticking point remained: the representation of the Hong Kong people. While there was no democracy under British rule, there was a legislative council with influence over policy, and there was pressure to democratise from segments of the population. So a hybrid system was created, with a strong central figure to replace the Governor-General, a chief executive. But the central question is how much of a say the people of Hong Kong would have in choosing that leader. Article 45 of Hong Kong's Basic Law reads, "The method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. The ultimate aim, quote, is the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage." But Article 45 also envisions a central role for the Chinese government. It also reads, "The chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be selected by election or through consultations held locally and be appointed by the Central People's Government." The role of the Chinese central government in selecting candidates for chief executive in the involvement of Hong Kong's voters in that selection and election is what is being debated in Hong Kong now, in the streets and in the office of the chief executive and all the way to Beijing. As the protests fade, talks are scheduled to start, as is the process to pick a chief executive, with the ultimate aim of universal suffrage, that is, one person, one vote. That system is due to be in place by 2017.
So as we've seen, the date 2017 is key for how Hong Kong will operate going forward. But that will only cover the next 30 years. The key date after that is 2047, the year when the system of one country, two systems is due to end. What replaces that arrangement remains to be seen. In Hong Kong's basic law, the language is about gradual and orderly progress. Hong Kong is very important to China still. It's the third most important financial center in the world. So a lot riding on these negotiations going up to 2017, but also what happens going up to 2047.
Fascinating. You want to tell your Nathan story?
Yeah, my name Nathan King. Nathan Road, very famous road in Hong Kong, and was actually named after that road because my dad was in China, in Hong Kong, when I was born, and it was the only name that popped into his head.
And interestingly enough, his first initial P, Peking.
Yes, you can imagine how many times he dined out on that one.
You were destined to be here, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.